The Passenger by Ulrich Alexander Boschwitz. Originally unsuccessful when it was released in a 1938 pre-World War II Nazi Germany, this novel was re-released in 2021 to critical acclaim in Germany for its ability to capture the Jewish persecution. Otto is a respected German Jewish businessman living in Berlin who is forced to leave his wife and flee his home in the middle of the night as Nazi soldiers knock on his door. Otto then travels on several trains in an attempt to flee Germany. On his travels, he meets a collection of people, some outcasts of the Nazi regime and others who embrace its ideology. Cruel City by Mungo Beti, a Cameroonian classic written in 1954, and another novel that initially wasn't popular, but as the author's later novels were more successful, this one has grown in importance. Banda is struggling to cope with the rise of capitalism and the rapid urbanization of his country. Banda is trying to sell this year's cocoa harvest in the hope that he will earn enough money to pay the bride price of the woman that he loves. But due to a series of bad luck, Banda loses both his cocoa harvest and his would-be bride. This is a novel that captures a changing Africa. Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh. If there was just one classic of Indian literature, surely this would be it. Published in 1956, it recounts the events of August 1947, events that are better known as partition. Mando Majra is a fictional border town between India and Pakistan, predominantly Muslim and Sikh in population. The town is surrounded by mobs of Muslims out for Sikh blood and mobs of Sikhs out for Muslim blood. The townsfolk live in a bubble, unaware of what is happening in the outside world. Inside the town, both religions have always lived together peacefully, but as rumours and word of mouth start to infiltrate the town folks become susceptible to outside views, and when news reaches them that all Muslims will be packed on board a train tomorrow, members of both religions start to become radicalized. No No Boy by John Okada. Set in 1946, this tells the story of Japanese-American Uricho Yamada, who returns home to Seattle after spending 2 years in an internment camp and federal prison for refusing to fight in the army. Ichiro not only faces criticism from fellow Japanese Americans for refusing to fight, as many of them did, but he also struggles with his parents and brother who have both embraced American culture. This is a book that explores what it means to belong in a nation and to a culture. It also explores loneliness, depression, isolation, racism, interracism, love and sacrifice. Another novel along a very similar line is Obasan by Joy Kogawa. This one is set in 1972 Alberta, with a 36-year-old middle school teacher, Naomi Nakami, recalling her Canadian family's traumatic experience during a World War II internment camp. Antic Hay by Aldous Huxley was published in 1923. Huxley is writing what he does best, and that is satire. In his crosshairs is the self-absorbed cultural elite and how they spend their time in the period after the end of World War I. When this book was published, it was condemned for its cynicism and immorality. It was banned in both Australia and it was burnt on the streets in Cairo. I mean, anything banned for its cynicism is enough to get anybody interested. Immorality is just a bonus. Annie John by Jamaica Kincaid was published in 1985 and details a girl growing up in Antigua. It covers issues as diverse as mother-daughter relationships, lesbianism, racism, clinical depression, poverty, education, and the struggle between medicine based on scientific fact and that based on native superstitious know-how. Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Crescendas is a 1952 Italian classic that was only translated into English last year by Anne Goldstein, the famed translator of Elena Ferrante. This is the translated pick for my Patreon's book club for February, and it seems like a very apt point in the video to thank my wonderful Patreons for their support. I would love you to consider signing up in 2024 and to join us for our book clubs and chats. Valeria starts jotting down her feelings of discontent in a notebook she keeps hidden in her closet. She begins to realise that her individuality is being stifled by her devotion to her husband, son and daughter, causing tension inside her family. The interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano by Olaudah Equiano, a 1789 memoir of an Igbo man who was captured and subsequently subject to a life of slavery, only to work his way to freedom and become one of Britain's first abolitionists. Taking place in the country of Ebwe, which the author says is part of Benin, but is more likely to be part of modern-day Nigeria. This is a memoir that covers slavery in Britain, the Caribbean, and Philadelphia during the mid and late 1700s, way before most literature we are reading about the slavery movement depicts it. Oil by Upton Sinclair. Sinclair is probably much better known for his novel The Jungle, which exposes the meat industry and how they exploit both their employers and their customers in the late 19th and early 20th century. Oil was written 15 years later and in a very similar manner to Jungle, but with a new industry in his crosshairs, a new industry to criticise, and one with much more bribery in it. The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi. Set in 1860, this is a psychological study of the Prince of Salina, a small island off the north coast of Sicily. As power transfers from the old Bourbon aristocracy into the new liberal bourgeoisie, we learn the inner thinkings and motives of our prince. Liberal bourgeoisie is a very interesting term to me. The Mysteries of Paris by Eugene Sue, the best-selling book in the world in the early 1840s. Rudolph is the Grand Duke of a fictional kingdom who arrives in Paris knowing the secret language of criminals, with a talent for fighting and being super intelligent, with the desire to reward the good and persecute the evil and to bring comfort on the suffering. Indiana by George Sand. A young French Creole woman is married to a colonel. This is a novel both exploring the themes of love, marriage, female desire, social and class constraints. It is also critical of the laws around equality of women in France at the time under the Napoleonic Code, where women couldn't obtain a divorce, own property, or even own their own children. Father Giraud by Honoré de Balzac. A once wealthy merchant is now impoverished and much despised. He becomes entangled in the affairs of several members of a boarding house he lives in, allowing Balzac to discuss the contrast between the struggles of those on the fringes and the opulence of the upper class. Materialism and stratification are also major themes. Nectar in a Sieve by Camilla Macandia. An Indian classic. Rukmani is a peasant woman who marries a local farmer, and they struggle with poverty and family and the rising impact of industrialism on their traditional way of life. It is a novel about the strength of familial bonds and the hope they have in the face of enduring hardship. The Door by Magda Sazbo. Set in a post-World War II Hungary, this novel explores the relationship between two women, a Hungarian novelist living in a small town who is our unnamed narrator and who certainly doesn't sound like a stand-in for the author at all, and her housekeeper. The Autobiography of an ExColored Man by James Weldon Johnson, a fictional autobiography of a biracial man living in the late 19th and earliest 20th century in Georgia, New York, and Europe, which tackles the issues of passing as well as the related issues of race, racism, identity, colorism, social structure, and discrimination. Also taking place in the South of America, in the North of America, and in Europe. We get to see the different attitudes in different places. Claudine at School by Colette. This novel recounts 16-year-old Claudine's final years at a rural French school, where she gets up to all sorts of trouble with her gang of teenage girls. A quirky, queer, feminist coming-of-age novel. Adolescent infatuation, rebellion, and sexuality are all themes in this novel, and this is the first in a series of 5 books by Colette. Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. A black priest and a white farmer travel to Johannesburg to search for their lost sons, but this is really a novel about the beginnings of apartheid in South Africa, about racism and life in South Africa in the late 1940s, and the struggle for justice that some people face. The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera. Unsurprisingly from the title, this is a book about two things: laughter and forgetting. The forgetting of history, of politics and life in general. It includes exiles and themes of self-preservation, told in 7 interlinked narratives set in a post-war Czechoslovakia. Two women in one, Noel El-Saadawi, an 18-year-old medical student and the daughter of a prominent Egyptian public official, struggles with the societal expectations placed upon her as a young woman living in Cairo. The novel explores the differences between the outward obedient nature that she has and the inward hidden rebellious nature she also has, as well as exploring themes of female identity, public expectations, and the challenges faced by women seeking personal fulfillment in a traditional society. Jasmine by Bharati Maharji. Jasmine travels from Hanaspur to Jalantar to Florida to New York and eventually to Iowa. She changes her personality in each location, especially once she moves to America and tries to adapt to their ways. This novel addresses migration, assimilation, duty, love, identity, and reinvention. Emily Wilson has translated Homer's poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. For those of you who need a reminder, the Iliad is the Trojan horse, which sounds much more like a generously endowed prophylactic than a military tactic these days, while the Odyssey is the story of a man trying to get home from the Trojan War without a map. Emily Wilson is the first woman to translate these texts, and she has written her translation in iambic pentameter verse, and using much more contemporary language than previous translations. Wilson's translations also challenge the masculine reading or translations of the poem that have previously been put forward. These texts are such foundational and important texts to literature, and having a feminist translation of them is such an interesting challenge to the status quo. Please hit that like and subscribe button. I've got one more of these 2024 TBR style videos coming out before I'm on to my best and my worst of 2023. So make sure you also ring that bell because you don't want to miss those videos. Tell me what classics you're thinking of reading next year. Are you trying to get a little bit off the beaten path like I am? Or are you trying to be more conservative with your picks? Let me know in the comment section. Bye bye.